Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining. This is Geoff Bessin, officially Intuilab's Chief Marketing Officer, but unofficially, if you've ever attended the Intro to Intuiface webinar, I'm the #1 fan of this product. I love Intuiface. I think it's amazing what it does. I think it exceeds expectations, and webinars give me an opportunity to speak with you live about how great it actually is. Today, we're going to speak about the data tracking feature of Intuiface. One of the beauties of interactive content is that by definition, because it's interactive, you know what people are interested in. They touch it, right? If you can capture that information, then you have a very rich, deep vein of information you can use to learn about your audience and to learn about the effectiveness of your design. You know exactly what people are doing, exactly what they're interested in. You can learn from that. And the data tracking capability of Intuiface makes that possible. I'm going to run through the basics of that data tracking capability, and then we'll do a demo so you can see it in action. Okay? Before we go into the details, I wanted to make sure you understood that some of the samples in our marketplace, those free pre-built experiences you can download using either Composer or Player, some of those pre-built samples already contain the data tracking feature and were configured to generate what we call data points. For example, if you download the restaurant menu experience, every time an item is viewed, we record a data point that can be studied offline. The concierge kiosk experience, we keep track of every attraction that's browsed and every time the guest book is signed. For the real estate property search, we recognize individual sessions, which essentially means individual users, as well as recording contact information and every property that's viewed. Finally, the science quiz sample not only records sessions, which again kind of differentiates one person from another, but we also record the score. All of this information is recorded automatically. These experiences are configured to record that information. So at the conclusion of this webinar, if you're ready to get started, you can download one of these guys and see how it's done. Okay, data tracking overview. Let's look at the top of this graphic, left side. That's all of your experiences in the field. You might have one, you might have a million, doesn't matter. Each individual experience is logging its own information independent from every other. Every time an event that you flag occurs, a data point is generated. 1,000 experiences, each one could be generating one data point, 1,000 data points, it doesn't matter. They independently collect data, track data, and make it available for analysis. To make it available for analysis, each one of those experiences in Player is pushing that data to the data tracking hub. Okay? The hub is something that we support. It's based on the Amazon S3 infrastructure, so it's a very robust cloud-based storage environment. All of your data tracking information is put there, centralized on the hub. Once it's centralized on the hub, it is then available to you to analyze through a variety of channels. And that's what those arrows represent on the right. You can download data from the hub directly into Excel. You can have data pushed from the hub into Segment, which you can think of as an analytics middleman. Data pushed into Segment can then be pushed by Segment into virtually any analytics, marketing automation, or data warehousing platform on the planet. It's like 150 different platforms. So it's a nice middleman for taking your data and putting it someplace else. It automates that process. We can also push it to Mixpanel. Now, Mixpanel is a data analytics platform. We could have used Segment. And if you want to do Mixpanel, you push data to Segment, and Segment pushes it to Mixpanel. We decided to build a native integration to Mixpanel just to illustrate how that would work for a dedicated analytics platform. REST. Unlike Segment and Mixpanel, where it's a push, when you use REST-based web services, that's a pull. Now, if you're not familiar with the concept, we will talk about it in a little bit, but the idea ultimately is you can get a third-party platform to dynamically, when it wants to, grab information in the hub and pull it down. Finally, you do have the option of having the hub push data into your database. It could be a database we host for you. It could be your own database. Doesn't matter where it is. We can do that. We can push the data in there. So you have all of these options. Now, maybe you've noticed this already. You don't do analytics with Intuiface. This is not an analytics capability. We track the data and make it available so you can put it into other platforms and do the analytics. We capture the data, make it available, you analyze it someplace else. Now, that might be sessions per day, guest book signed, top 5 attractions on a rainy day. We'll get into the different permutations, the kind of things you can study. But at the end of the day, recognize what you're doing is you're using Intuiface to collect the data that you will subsequently, at a later moment, study. Okay? Ultimately, what you're collecting is information about events. Okay? In fact, in Intuiface, and you'll see this in Intuiface, what we say you're doing is you're logging an event. By logging an event, you're creating a data point. Each logged event has an associated data point. And I'll show you all this, but just to get used to the nomenclature. At the end of the day, you're logging events. And there are 3 general classes of events. There's the classic one, the one you'd understand and expect, which is interaction. If somebody touches an item in a product catalog, that touches an event and you want to capture information about that. You want to know what they touched. Which product amongst the hundreds or thousands in your catalog did they touch? You want to record that fact, right? So that's classic. What video did they watch? What scenes did they visit? What book did they read or whatever? You can trigger off anything. The second class has to do with user identification. Now, that can be an explicit event. For example, they fill out a guest book or they fill out some sort of form and submit it. You could use that submission event to say, take all that user information and create a data point around it. Or it could be implicit. Maybe they swipe a card and under the covers, you pull information off that card and some back-end data source and you record that. So that there's more than one way to slice it. The third class of information is about the location. Or maybe it's about everything other than what they touched and who they are. It's everything else. Could be the time of day, day of the week, the weather outside, the city, the store, this place inside the store, the age of the person, anything else. It's about the environment, essentially. So there are sort of 3 general classes of information, each of which can be independently logged or logged collectively. Interaction events, user identification, and environmental information. Again, we're defining terms as we walk through this. I think you get more comfortable with the distinction and how they fit together. Now, when you're logging events, when you're recording information for analysis, when you're creating those data points, for the most part, they're going to be custom events. You're telling Intuiface, please record this thing. This is important. Please record this thing. Almost always, you're defining those events. You're specifying it. Intuiface doesn't just randomly record everything just in case you might need to know it. You need to tell Intuiface, go record this thing when that thing happens, or whatever. You'll see that in the demo. There are a couple automatic events, however. In other words, you don't have to request them. They're going to happen automatically. The first is experience started and stopped. And there's only one experience started, only one experience stopped, right? That's it. Because it's not start, stop, start, stop. It's if you started, it's a new instance of the experience. So that'll happen automatically. That'll be recorded. And we'll record when it stopped, the time elapsed. And then scene entered and left. Every time you enter a scene, that's automatically recorded as a data point. Every time a scene is left, that's automatically recorded as a data point. And we note how many seconds were spent in that scene. If you have a lot of, it's a lot of work, to just manually do this for every scene. We just automatically do it for you. We make it easy. You could shut that off. I mean, you could say, no, don't record that. But by default, it's on and you can have it recorded. As you'll learn, for custom events, not only are they custom, I mean, you could give it its own name or whatever, but you can have an unlimited number of parameters. So let's talk about some of these details. Automatic event capture, so we spoke about that. I should mention that this isn't just about the event, experience started or stopped, scene entry and exit. This is also about information that colors that event. We automatically record the local timestamp and universal timestamp, the name of the device, the operating system, the version of the operating system, the the Intuiface product, the version of the Intuiface product, the name of the experience, the scene, all of that information is collected automatically. The reason is because it helps you filter and sort the data. One of the biggest tricks with data tracking, not just Intuiface in general, is being proactive about what data you want to capture, not necessarily because you need it now, but because you might need it one day. You can't go back, right? You can't roll back the clock and collect data retroactively. So you kind of need to be a little proactive, and that's why we automatically capture some of this information so you don't have to. About that notion of unlimited parameters, if I'm browsing a catalog and I touch an item, the data point could be an item was touched. Not even which item. The data point could just be an item was touched. Maybe that's good enough for you, I don't know. You could have one parameter, which is the name of the item. That might be helpful. You could have two parameters, the name of the item and the price. You could have 15 parameters, the name of the item and the price, the name of the person and their email address and the day of the year and which store was it in. You get the idea. You can have as many parameters as you want for an individual data point. Every time you log an event, every time you create a data point, you can have as many parameters as you want. And it could be a different number of parameters every time you record a data point. I mean, it doesn't have to be the same, the same in a running experience. It can be as many as you want and different everywhere. The scenario I originally described, which is all the individual players were pushing data to the data tracking hub, assumes you're online, right? It assumes there's an internet connection between players and the data tracking hub. But that's not always the case. Sometimes devices are offline, either intentionally or by accident. That's okay. We store the data on the local device if no internet connection is present. We continue to do that until either the internet connection comes back and then we purge the data to the data tracking hub, or we run out of disk space. Right? Obviously, if we run out of disk space, then we can't save any more data, but hopefully you got a lot of room. And thus, you don't have to be online to use the data tracking feature. Just make sure at some point that device goes online and boom, we'll push all the data up to the hub. Session management. I mentioned this briefly when talking about the sample experiences we've prepped so you can see data tracking in action. You may be familiar with the notion of sessions in the context of web analytics, whether you use Google Analytics or whatever. The concept is the same, differentiating one visitor from another, or differentiating one visitor's visit from another visit by the same person. Those are known as sessions. Each visit is known as a session. And it's important because you want to differentiate one person from another. You want to differentiate one visit from another. That would be nice with Intuiface too, right? It would be nice to differentiate one visitor from another. That would be good. You would use sessions to do that. You would associate different sessions with different people. Here's the trick. On the web, it's easy to differentiate people. They each have a unique IP address. No two IP addresses are the same. So two different IP addresses, two different people, two different sessions. That's easy. If you have a kiosk in a public location, there's no IP address. It's the same screen. So how the heck do you differentiate one person from another? There's no magic. Intuiface can't tell based on the fingerprint or something like this. You need to come up with a way. You need to architect your experience in a way that you can assume it's a new user. For example, put a button in your experience that says start over. It's typically a safe assumption that if somebody touches start over, it's a new person, it's a new session. Or put in an inactivity timer. After X number of seconds, if nobody's done anything, reset the experience. The assumption is anything that happens after the reset is being done by a new person, so it's a new session. Another option, maybe you're working with one of those cameras and software platforms that can differentiate age and gender and things like that. You could use that to say, oh, that's a different person, it's a new session. So there's more than one way to approach it, but you have to do something yourself. Intuiface just can't guess on its own. I think that's clear. I hope it's clear. not only might you be offline, but even if you're online, it might be a 3G or 4G, telecom connection. It's likely you're paying for the bandwidth, you're paying for the data going back and forth over that 4G, 3G connection. We've compressed the data to minimize how much data we consume over that connection. The data is only text to begin with, so it's probably never that big anyway, but I guess if you wait long enough, it can still get pretty big, right? If you're caching a lot of data locally. Or it's just running a long time and pushing a lot of data. So we do compress it, and it compresses pretty tightly. It's like a 98% compression rate or something like this. Bottom line, we minimize the amount of data consumed by that push of data points to the hub. Finally, and most wonderfully, everything we're talking about, everything I'll show you, works on all the platforms we support. If Player runs on it, if Player runs on that platform, then you can do data tracking on that platform. That's every iPad, Android devices, Chrome OS-based devices, LG's WebOS, any Windows device, and Samsung Smart Signage platform. Player runs on all 6 of those, so you can do data tracking on all 6 of those. Pretty awesome. So it doesn't matter. And this is enterprise-class data tracking capability. This is kick-butt data tracking capability. Why? Because of how detailed the interactivity you create can be. The finer the level of detail, the more options you give people, the more personalized you make it, the more information you learn about those people, the more information you learn about your audience. So you get a fine-grained level of detail about just about anything you can think of and make it available for analysis. That's pretty impressive. There's, other than Excel, other than the web, you want to make sure there's a setup before you start collecting data to make sure that it's available. Let me show you what I mean. So this is the data tracking section of the My Intuiface website. So you go to My Intuiface, you click data tracking. Here we are. You'll notice the connector options at the bottom. If I want to download data from the data tracking hub into an Excel spreadsheet, that's okay. You can do that whenever you want. Once the data is in the hub, you can come back a week later. It doesn't matter. You specify the date range, whether or not you want one or more devices. You can do a little pre-filtering and then download the data points. That you can do whenever you want. For mixed panel and segment, because that's a push from the data tracking hub, you have to make sure the connector is set up before you put data in the hub. Once it's in the hub, you can't, after the fact, say, go push that into mixed panel or segment. With mixed panel, all we need to know is the name of the mixed panel project and the token of that mixed panel project. That comes from mixed panel. Every project is a token. So you just go to mixed panel, you get the token, and you put it here. That's all we need to know. The name, the token, that's it, end of story. And notice you can have multiple mixed panel projects all getting data at the same time. It's the same idea for segment. The only difference is they don't call it a token, they call it a write key. Other than that, it's the exact same idea, including having more than one project at the same time. Remember, mixed panel is a dedicated analytics platform, whereas segment is a middleman. We don't have a special relationship with either of them. There's no relationship there. We just really like segment because it's a middleman for pretty much every analytics, marketing automation, and data warehousing platform on the planet. And we like mixed panel because it's got a great free account. You can do a lot of cool analytics stuff with it. It's easy to use. So we chose it ourselves. Use whatever you want. If you want to do a REST-based web services query, like Excel, that's a pull. So that you can do whenever. You don't have to prep it before you start collecting data. If you're working with your own database, okay, then that's something you also want to prep beforehand. You can't, after the fact, push data from the hub to the database. You need to set up that connector. So as soon as the data shows up in the hub, it'll get pushed to the appropriate location. Okay? Great. It's demo time. All right. Let's get to that scene. Set up data tracking in Composer. All right, the first thing you need to do, is add the data tracking interface asset. There's a dedicated asset for it. It's at the top. There it is, data tracking. And I've added it to my experience. Simply by adding it to my experience, every time I push play, we're going to record the automatic events. Experience started, experience stopped, scene entered, scene left. That's going to be automatic. Again, there's a way to shut it off, but by default it's automatic. Here's what I'd like to do. Let's add a button. So here's a button. Let's make it a little easier to see. We'll fill it up. Actually, we'll go more properties panel so we can make it easier to see the text as well. So we'll call this start session. I could have called this Geoff. It doesn't matter. There. I want two things to happen when I push this button. One, I want to record a data point that says a new session has started. Two, I want to navigate to the next scene. Okay, let's do that. When the start session button is pressed and released, then first, data tracking, start new session. I could give a session ID, or I could get a session ID through binding. If you leave it blank, we generate a random series of letters and numbers as a session ID, and that's what I'm going to do here. So that session ID is going to have a unique identifier that we create, Intuiface creates randomly. Second action, scene-to-scene navigation, go to the next scene. Two things will happen when I push that button. We'll record that it's a new session, and we'll go to the next scene. Here's the next scene. For those of you who were lucky enough to sit in on the webinar called Boost Your Experiences with Excel, this should be familiar. It's a great webinar. It's all about how to access data through external data sources, and we use Excel as an example. It's a very powerful approach to Intuiface. So if you haven't seen the webinar, I encourage it. That's an image gallery. There's actually more images than you can see. I can swipe my way left and right through that set of images. So I have a whole bunch of photos in that gallery. And what I want to have happen is that every time I touch an image, I'd like to record the fact that that image has been touched. I want to know what images in the photo gallery were touched. If we open up the scene structure panel, there's already a set of actions associated with that touch. I'm going to be adding another one essentially. So when an image and that template is tapped, and look, I'm going to skip over some principles about working with interface assets and external data sources because that's a topic for a different webinar. That's the Boost Your Experiences webinar. So some of these concepts for interface assets are a little foreign. I'm sorry, this isn't the best place to review them, but we do have that other webinar, Boost Your Experiences, so be sure to watch that. All right, when an image is tapped, we already do a bunch of stuff. And I can tell you what we're doing. We're showing an information panel. It contains information about the image that's been touched, its name and the artist and the cost and things like that. We're already doing that. I want to add one more action. Because remember, I want to record with a data tracking feature what's been touched. I want to know what's been touched. We'll add another action. We'll select the data tracking interface asset. We're logging an event. It's a custom event. And now I need to give that event a name. Intuiface remembers old event names, and I've already typed photo scene elsewhere. So it has a list. I don't have to use that. I could type Geoff. I could type whatever I want. It remembers photo scene, and it works for me. So I'm keeping photo scene. I could be done. I could click OK. And every time an image is tapped, we're going to record an event called photo scene. But we don't yet know which photo. So let's specify that using parameters. Parameter 1. Let's call it name. Remember, just like event names, it also remembers parameter names. Intuiface just remembers. I could type anything I want, but we'll keep what was already there, name, and let's browse through binding to the spreadsheet and get the name of the selected photo from that spreadsheet. Again, this uses some interface asset principles. If this is not familiar to you, watch that Boost Your Experiences webinar. It'll answer all the questions. Needless to say, when an image is tapped, not only will it display all that information in information panel, but under the covers, we're going to log an event. That is, we're creating a data point. Its name is photo scene. It has one parameter name. It'll be the artwork. And another parameter, price. And let's bind to the price. Every time an image is touched, we create a single data point with two parameters, name, price. Okay, there's a button here. See that sign our guest book? So that takes us to the next scene, identify users. On that scene is a little guest book with email address and comment. What I'd like to do is to save that information, the email address and the comment, using data tracking. I'm not going to write it to a local file, write it to an Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to use data tracking to capture that information. We'll go off the send button. So here's the existing action off the send button. When the send button is pressed and released, it goes to the next scene. Great, but let's log an event, data tracking, log an event. In this case, it's guest book signed. Don't be surprised. Again, Intuiface remembers event names are previously used. This isn't magic. You can type in anything you want. So guest book signed, new parameter 1. We'll call this email. So I need to get the email address from the email text input asset. I need to grab it out of there. So let me drop down this email input text. So that's the email address. We'll add one more parameter for the comment. It's comment. Through binding, we'll go to the comment input text asset and text. Okay, great. When that send button is pressed, remember what it did originally was navigated to the next scene. In addition, now it's also going to generate a data point with the email address and the comment. Finally, end of session. When we reach this scene, we want to say the session is ended. So at the scene level, no button or text asset, just at the scene level, we'll add a trigger, which is has been entered. So when the scene has been entered, then data tracking, stop current session. Okay. I don't know if that's easy or hard. It sure seems easy to me. I've done it a couple times. Certainly, if you're not used to seeing it, there's a few concepts you're trying to keep up with. I understand that. But I think with a little bit of effort, that's not hard. And you can very quickly collect some really rich information. Let's generate some data points here. Here's our start session button. Remember, it does two things. It navigates me to the next scene, and it calls the data tracking action start new session. 1, 2, 3, touch. Here's my photo gallery. Remember, it's a big one, right? There's a whole bunch of images here. I'm swiping left and right. Let's touch a few images. Here's the signs. Under the covers, it generated this information panel, and it created a data point. Its name, the event name is photo scene. It has two parameters, artwork name and price. Artwork name, Route 66 Cemetery. Price, $9.50. Let's see, here's some elephants. Giant's hug. Zebras. Black and white fury. Here we are in Thailand. That's an awesome picture. Elephant's pond. And one more. This is a good looking one. Floating market. Okay. I think it was 5 images that I touched, which means there should be 5 data points. And we'll see. Sign our guest book. Touch. Email address. Geoff at Bessin.com. Really awesome gallery. Almost as good as Intuiface. Here's my send button. It's going to do 2 things, navigate me to the next scene, and generate a data point called guestbook signed. 2 parameters, email, comment. 1, 2, 3, send. Thank you for participating. And because we have entered this scene, we triggered that action, end current session. Before we look at the data, I wanted to address something. All of the information we recorded, all of the events we recognized and the parameter values, those were sort of obvious values coming directly from the experience. Be aware, it does not have to be that explicit. If the information is accessible in player, you can use it to create parameters for a given data point. For example, the weather. Some of you might recall that we have a weather interface asset that grabs weather from an external third-party service. This is a live weather feed, and there's the real data for London. Because this information is accessible in player, You can use it to create parameters for your data points. For example, when I was touching pictures in the photo gallery, I didn't just have to record the name and the price of the artwork. I could have also recorded the temperature outside and whether or not it was raining. This is not a foolish idea. It is certainly possible that the most popular items on a rainy day are different from the most popular items on a sunny day or a wintry day or whatever. That would be good to know, right? So that it's not crazy to get that kind of information. And if it's accessible, you can store it as a parameter, multiple parameters. Same thing for device information. Now, some of this we record automatically anyway, but it's just another example of information that's available so you can capture it and treat it as additional parameters for your data points. Let's look at our data. Now, it usually takes 1 to 2 minutes for data to get to the data tracking hub and to become available. Usually not less than a minute, usually not more than 2 minutes. So if you generate data and then run on over to download a spreadsheet, it may not be there yet. You usually need to give it about 1 or 2 minutes. I think it's been enough time. Let's look at it in Excel first. So this is saying just from April 13th to May 11th, for all the devices, for all the Intuiface products, just download everything. I want everything in a spreadsheet. So download data points, open. Here we are. Let's widen the columns. All right, each row is a data point, data point, data point, data point. Each column is a parameter. Here's a lot of automatically recorded parameters. Universal timestamp, local time, name of the device, Intuiface application version. Player tags. If you tag player, they'd be listed here. Operating system, version of the operating system, name of the experience, name of the scene. All of these are recorded automatically for every data point. You don't have to tell us to do it. We do it automatically. Again, why? Because that way you can filter on it, or you can sort. So here's all of our data points, and down here at the bottom, here we are. This is the webinar right now. It's 1:30 in the afternoon here in the East Coast of the U.S. Universal time, that would make it 5:30. I'm sorry, 5:30. Let's scroll on over to the side. And here's the parameters that we recorded. Now, if you look at the top, here's the event name, and then we have all of the parameters. Name, price, email, comment. If I had other parameters, they would be in column R, column S, column T, and they go on and on and on and on. Name, price, email, comment. So here it is. Experience started, session started, photo scene, photo scene, photo scene, photo scene. Here they are, Route 66, Giants Hug. Remember that? Guest book signed. Geoff at Bessin.com, really awesome gallery. There it is. Success. Notice, for example, let's see, session started, session stopped. So there is your time lapse. So that's measured in seconds. So the session lasted 84 seconds. Okay. There's our data. By the way, we're still running Intuiface, right? We're still running Intuiface, so you're not going to see the experience stopped, for example. It's still running. Retrieve your data through web services. Okay, let me exit out of play mode here so I can show you this in action. Let's go to that scene. Okay, we have a URL down here. This URL is basically saying, hey, Data Tracking Hub, give me all the data associated with my Intuiface account. That's what that credential key is. Every account has its own credential key. Go back to Excel, new spreadsheet, data from web. So I'm going to paste in that URL. And Excel is smart enough to know that that means, oh, a URL, okay, it's a REST-based web service. You're trying to grab data. So that's a preview of my data. It's saying, is this what you wanted? Is that what you were looking for? Yeah, so import it. Import. Where do I want to put it? Sure, just take the default. And there it is. Other than the cute coloring, it's the same data. It's the same data. So why bother? Here's the beauty of REST-based web services. That's a dynamic connection. If I record a bunch of data points and download a spreadsheet to Excel, not the web services part, just download to Excel, and then 5 minutes later download again to get more data, that's a brand new spreadsheet. I'm not overwriting existing data, I'm creating a brand new spreadsheet, which means every time I build a table based on my data, I have to rebuild it because it's a brand new spreadsheet. With a dynamic data connection, such as here with the REST-based web services, you can update the same sheet. Maybe you're familiar with the concept of a pivot table. I can associate the query, that web services query, with the pivot table. So every time I rerun the query, you see refresh up here at the top? Every time I refresh that query, it updates the data and updates any tables and graphs based on that data. That's nice. I don't have to recreate anything, I just have to refresh the data. Most third-party analytics platforms, data warehousing, that sort of thing, support this kind of notion of grabbing data dynamically and supplementing with the existing data. That's why this feature exists. A lot of platforms support that ability to query data on the fly using web services. So that's why it's there. But you can use it with Excel as well. Okay, back into play mode. Mix panel. So here's mix panel. Again, we don't have a special relationship, and this is not a demo about how to use mix panel. If you're interested, feel free to try it. They have a nice free account. This is one place where the data could go, and you can analyze it. There's lots of ways to slice and dice and to filter data, to sort the data, and lots of different ways to change the way the data is represented. And it's really quick. It's all web-based, pretty dynamic. This live view, you see the live view up here? That just shows me all the data that's coming in today. Here's the data points that we generated just now. I did a webinar earlier today. There it is from 5 hours ago. So this is all the data that came in a given time span, and you can slice and dice. It's pretty impressive. Okay, pricing. Like any data analysis platform, you're paying for the data points. That's how Segment works. That's how Mixpanel works. So they all work the same way. You're paying for the data points. With Intuiface, for free, you get 1,000 data points per month. It's unlikely that's enough for real work. Should be more than enough to make sure it's working the way you want it to. If you're going to exceed 1,000 data points, if you need 1,001 or more, then you need to buy one of the data tracking plans. The first paid plan is the project plan. For 1,000 US in North America, for 1,000 euros everywhere else, you get 25,000 data points per month. Notice in terms of connectors, even with the free plan, you're getting Excel, Mixpanel, Segment, and REST web services. You get those automatically. And that carries across all other plans. So project plan, billed annually, 25,000 a month. The growth plan, 2,000 annually or 300 a month. That's 100,000 data points per month. You get the idea. For premium and custom, you can then add in your own database. Again, we could host it for you. Maybe it's your own. There's some custom work here. We have to build a dedicated connector. There's a little bit of development work there, but okay, no problem. You purchase premium or custom, and there you go. It's hard to say how many data points are enough for you. It depends on how many custom events you've created and how often they're called, right? So it's a little tough to say. Depending on how you've architected it, 25,000 might be more than enough, or it might be very insignificant. How many experiences are running? How long are they running? How many data points are generated by them? And, something you just have to think about. We automate the process that if you go over, you get emails, and we set it up so that you can't just be stuck not collecting data points. That doesn't happen, but just be aware that there are limits to each plan. And if you amortize this out over 12 months, it's not a lot of money for a lot of data points and a ton of value. Remember, this isn't just about recording the interests of your users, but it's about identifying the quality of your design. If you want to drive traffic to a particular item and nobody's going there, that could be a design issue. Data tracking is not just about recording information about users, but also about the quality of your design. Use it. Pilot it in a public place, record some data points, say, is this working effectively? Are people doing what we want them to do? Or are they getting lost? I like to conclude by reviewing the types of questions that can be answered through analytics. Why to bother? The fact that you're attending this webinar implies you at least have a certain level of appreciation for data tracking, but still, if it's new to you, you may not really have thought through the potential. So let me use this opportunity to do that. On the retail side, which stores have the most interactive signage use? Which product generated the most interest on a rainy day? What is the percentage of loyalty card holders who use the interactive kiosk? What is the gender split for kiosk users? All of this is actionable information. By knowing the answers to these questions, you can make changes to create a better business or a more effective sign or whatever the heck your goal is, right? For sales presentations, how many times was the pitch delivered? How much time was spent delivering the pitch? Which topics were most discussed with a prospect? What feedback does the presenter have to share? If I'm running a sales team, that's good to know. Who's using it? How often are they using it? How long do they spend in it? What do they show in it? And by the way, there could be a form at the end that the rep fills out and that uploads information about what worked, what didn't work, whatever. And that's done in real time so they don't kind of lose the thread after they go home. Trade shows. Could be very valuable at trade shows. First of all, you could be using Intuiface to collect leads. So how many leads were collected during the first day? What were the most popular videos? What was the average idle time for various times of day? What share of sessions were run by staff versus self-service? Again, very actionable questions, right? If you have 3 displays in the booth and only 2 were used, where was that third one and why wasn't it used? If all of your experiences are only being used by staff, how come nobody in the trade show knew that they could use it for self-service? That sounds like a design problem. Exhibits, galleries, libraries, archives, museums, that sort of thing. What were the most popular videos or topics? What is the average length of a session? How many members identified themselves? What feedback did visitors have to share through something like a guest book? Hospitality, restaurants, hotels. What is the most popular menu item on a weekday? Which of the promoted restaurants is most often selected on a rainy day? Which tourist destination gets the least number of queries? Which partner ads generated the most views and requests for an email? That's pretty cool. I don't know how many people think of using Intuiface to run ads, but why not? And with data tracking, you can count the number of clicks. You could be a little Google, right? And you can identify which ads were clicked, how often they were clicked, and you can bill based on that. You can also use data tracking to say, nobody ever clicks on this one, so I want to stop carrying it. And okay, and now I know that on rainy days I should show this restaurant, but don't even bother on a winter, who knows? Maybe I'm beating a dead horse here, but hopefully it's obvious there's a ton of value hidden in the data. And Intuiface makes it possible to pull it all out. All of this is documented. You did the right thing. You attended this webinar. Hopefully you feel much more confident about the feature and are excited to get going. Maybe you want to use some of those samples we pre-created with data tracking, but you can use it on yourself. Just remember the 1,000 data point limit. It's also heavily documented online. There's a whole chapter, a whole section with multiple chapters all about data tracking. Everything you can think of. I think we document the heck out of it in a good way. I think you can be productive very quickly. So for those of you who can't stay around, I want to thank you for attending. Hopefully this has been valuable. Hopefully you're excited to get started. And remember, it's never too late to contact support or talk to the user community about these features. For everyone else, I'm going to stick around. Take a look at any of the questions you've submitted. Wait for additional questions and I'll answer them live, okay? For those who are heading out, thank you so much for attending. And for those sticking around, thanks for sticking around. Let me look at your questions.